Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. For the record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
For the record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is Friday, the first day of September 2017. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor. My two co-hosts, Dr. Steve MacPhail, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn. You're welcome to join us in the conversation by calling us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flow. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. You can also email us at fortherecord. That is one word, for the record, at candw.ky. That is, if you don't really like to talk on the telephone, then use our email. And of course, the show is brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. When you do call in, you will hear that beautiful radio voice 9 times out of 10. That beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. Now, we're sort of getting back on a regular schedule. We have now designated Fridays for the official opposition to be on For the Record. I have a schedule, or at least one date set aside for government for the 13th of September. I believe that will be on a Monday as well. So it looks like government is getting back to their regular schedule on Monday. So on Mondays we will have government. On Fridays we will have the official opposition. And it is our pleasure to have in the studio with us this morning the member who represents the constituency of Newlands, Mr. Alva Suku, with us. So I want to say good morning to Mr. Suku. Good morning to my two co-hosts, Dr. Steve MacPhail and Ms. Teresa Pitcairn. Mr. Suku, good morning. I think this is the first time, this is probably the second time since after the elections, I believe, right?
Morning. Yes. I think this is my second visit. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say good morning to your co-hosts, Mr. MacPhail and my sister Teresa over here.
Yes.
And it's a pleasure to be on. And, of course, good morning to the listening public.
Okay. Lots of things have been happening since the elections. And I want to, first of all, give you an opportunity, Mr. Suku, to sort of like set the table for us, lay the foundation in terms of what has been happening. And then there are some topical issues that we will want to discuss as well.
Okay. And I'll try to do my best. We had a little scheduling mix-up, so I wasn't aware I was on until 6 o'clock this morning, so I bet I'll do my best. But so far, I'm trying to get back into the flow of things. Doing a lot of work in Newlands in my constituency. Mr. Eden and I are actually setting up an office that we share. And because in the past 2 years, I've actually just been on my own in a smaller office, but he and I have decided to work together, continue working together. So our office is now open. It's on Pedro Castle Road. It's right at the top of the road next to where Tall Tree used to be. Mm-hmm. And it's a little pink building there. It used to be a souvenir shop.
Oh, yes.
But he and I have taken that over now, so that's where our constituents can find us, and we'll be serving both constituencies from there, so Newlands and Savannah together. Which works out nicely because those two communities are very closely interlinked. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a good thing for us to do. As far as how things are going. I was accused in the LA recently of preaching doom and gloom, so I'll try to be a bit positive this morning. But I'm watching carefully to see how this unity government goes about, running the country. I do have some concerns in terms of, how much importance is being given to the role of the opposition. And, of course, now that we have single-member constituencies, I do have some concerns about just how much attention will be given to our constituencies. We did meet with Cabinet. We did put together, I think, a sensible list of items that were important to the constituents in for me in particular, Newlands, and Mr. Eden Savannah, and of course the other members of the opposition were there and they presented theirs. I don't see much of that reflected in the SPS. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the SPS is very broad, and you won't see a great amount of detail there. So I'm waiting to see what the final budget looks like. But I did have some concerns that, and of course we're opposition, so we don't have the say. Well, we have the say, we just don't have our way. Yeah. And we would expect that our priorities are not going to be the government's priorities. But I didn't see too much thought being given to what we presented. But we will continue to advocate and fight. We may get down to finance committee. That is the arena for these sorts of discussions. And I just really hope that people remain cognizant of the fact that they have constituents, and in particular the Borden Town members. They have to understand that while you're there as part of the government, you also have a constituency to be and a district to be responsible for as well. So, I would hope to see a little bit more of an atmosphere of cooperation, but that's not what I'm getting, and I'm not surprised. I'm really not, and in particular as it relates to me, I'm not surprised. I was dubbed the bad boy from a long time ago, and I didn't expect much cooperation from this government. But I'm here. The people of Newlands have chosen me, and I'm going to continue to work as hard as I can for my constituents and advocate for them. And we'll see what happens in this upcoming budget session.
Okay. I also fail to acknowledge the fact that you are the deputy leader of the opposition as well. Mm-hmm. I did hear some banter in the Legislative Assembly during the debate, and I think there may have been some vague reference to your margin of victory in the constituency, and which sort of prompts me to say, do you feel that the possible lack of cooperation by the government would be reflected in terms of, because of that margin of victory, because it's a marginal seat, will that determine how much support you would get for that constituency? It shouldn't happen, because the constituency should get exactly what it needs, what it deserves. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you hold back from that constituency, then in the next election, it may reflect on your inability or your ability to deliver.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be blunt. It shouldn't reflect on the attention that Newlands gets. Mm-hmm. But the comment was made while I was on my feet debating, I think it was my motion. And the comment was made that I barely got elected. Now, the person that made that comment should remember the last time they said that to me. I ended up leaving the government bench and going off on my own to make my own way. And my response to the comment was, well, I'm still here. Now, that comment was loaded. I don't think it had much to do with Newlands. It had more to do with the candidates not the candidates, but one of the candidates that I defeated. Mm-hmm. And there is from the beginning, from the day after election, I was made aware that there was no intention to work with me, no matter what I had to offer. That was off the table in all of the discussions and negotiations going forward. A lot of people don't know that. But it was made clear. There's nothing here for Al Saku. There's nothing here for Kenneth Bryan. So those two guys, just leave them out of the discussions. And I accepted that. I understood that there was some bad blood. And, I just moved forward and negotiated the best that I could. I'm happy to have ended up where I am now. And in hindsight, I think there was some divine intervention, because at one point I was deputy premier during the negotiations. I am grateful to God that I'm not, because under those circumstances, I don't think that it would have been the best outcome for the country. Me being in opposition, another term, is, it has its negatives, because I don't get to push forward the policies and the ideas that I came to the table with. However, what I see developing on the other side, I don't think I'd be very comfortable over there. And based on some of the expressions during the debates and so forth, I don't think some of them are comfortable either. But, we make our own choices, and we make our bed, as my mother used to say, and you sleep in it. So we will see what happens. But, a lot of that was, I'd say was, people were taking shots at me in particular, because, the word is out that I can't survive past this 4 years. They have to get their candidate back. So we'll see what happens. I'm not going to lie down. I'm going to continue to do what I've always been doing. And that so far that has worked for me. And with reference to me winning by a slim margin, I truly believe that nothing good comes easy. And the fact that I had to work really hard, and we'll see, when I tell you I had to work hard, I had to work hard. I was on the road every single night, some 3-4 hours during the day. It was an intense campaign. I know that I was up against Goliath, who had the resources, and I didn't have that many resources, so I had to get on the ground and talk to my people. Going through that experience, that it humbled me, because I know in the end, when I when I was declared the winner in Newlands, I broke down. I basically broke down, because I realized at that point just how much effort I had put into it. And at that point I was completely exhausted. But as I said, nothing good comes easy.
Okay.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're going to take a commercial break. When we return, I want to give my two co-hosts here an opportunity to make some comments and to ask you some questions as well, Mrs. Suku. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, my two co-hosts, Dr. Steve Macfield and Ms. Teresa Pitcairn, and our special guest this morning, Mr. Alva Suku, representing the constituency of Newlands in our Legislative Assembly, and he is also the deputy leader of the opposition. Want to give my two co-hosts an opportunity before we go to the news in about another 7 minutes or so, and I'll give them an opportunity to pose some questions to Mr. Suku. Who wants to start first?
Yeah, I will just start first. And first of all, let me also say many thanks, as usual, for the listening audience and giving us this opportunity to have a conversation with them. Mm-hmm. As I listened to you, Al, as maybe this is gender related, my thought was, why are you guys behaving like juveniles? I mean, really and truly, we pay you to represent our interest. We pay you a lot of money over a 4-year period, which amounts to almost $750,000. That's what the Caymanian public pay you guys. And you are messing about in that sacred environment with our children, with our future, and making such asinine statements. No, that I don't know. I just don't get it. I mean, Mr. Mayfield, I really don't get it. I mean,
my position is this. I came today with a very heavy heart. I didn't really want to come this morning because I didn't want to sound sour. But when I read all of the comments, especially in the Compass newspaper about social welfare quagmire and a decade of inefficiencies and rising costs, and then I see the strategic policy statement in it, and it has nothing in it to rectify all of these problems that we are having. And what it reminds me of It reminds me of the aftermath of slavery, when the slave masters refused to hire the slaves who made them rich, who refused to pay them after they had given generations and the generation of their labor for free. They refused to hire them to pay them, and it seems that we rather hire people from other places, just like what the slave masters did with the Negroes after emancipation. They brought people from India and from China as indentured servants and paid them to do the work instead of paying the people who had stood by them and had died for them all for decades and decades. And it seems to me that there's a national inability syndrome in the legislature. The people that we hired now have no clue. And what I see in the strategic policy statement is a declaration of national inabilities. It has nothing to do with making the Caymanian people better off. And it seems to me that, as my colleague and co-host Teresa Pitcairn has said, we pay you a lot of money for a part-time job. There's no part-time job in the world that gets paid as well as the legislature, people in the legislature do. And by the way, I heard them talk about parliament. There's no parliament in Cayman. There's a legislature. Mm-hmm. And people keep talking about parliament, puffing up themselves to make them bigger than what they are. They're getting paid some good sum of money for a part-time job. And they have done nothing, almost nothing to benefit the Caymanian people. The Caymanian people now are going. I was asking during the break, where is the place that they are going to put the reservation for us? Where is it going to be located in the Cayman Islands? Where the reservation is going to be? I heard one minister now, well, during the election, saying that he was going to bring, the first thing he was going to do was bring an amendment to the immigration law to stop the issuance of work permits so that the Caymanian people can be employed. Where is that amendment? Where is it? And
a minister made that comment?
He's now a minister.
No, he's now a minister.
He's now a minister. Where is that amendment? I see them selling out Crown lands. I see them selling out lands that people are going to need for the next generation. I see there's a lack of medical supplies and drugs in the hospital to make poor people better. And it seems to me that what the lady said the other day really affected me when she said all we do is talk and we do nothing. There's no results. So we're talking, and the same thing happened with the people in our legislature. I remember when I look at the Hansards in the 1970s, when 3 people out of the number of 12 legislators, Jim Borden, Haig Borden, and Captain Reed, they were the opposition, and they ran the legislature from the back bench. Even though they had 9 people who elected, government was against them. They were so formidable that they paved the way for one of the fastest growing middle class in the Caribbean between 1976 and 1984. And after they went, there's no people in the legislature now. All is a pia man, and people who are worried about what the other guy thinks about him, and thinks about the other person, or thinks about their family.
Okay, but I was really looking more for a question from Mr. Suku, though. Rather, we're going to get into all of those details later on. What I would point out, Mr. Suku, is that we see things coming out of the Public Accounts Committee, for instance, this whole issue of government land, crown lands for sale, something that without having the opposition in the Public Accounts Committee and a chairman who's prepared to put these things on public, have them tabled, they become public, that a lot of these things we would never know. You referred earlier to the fact that as the opposition, you can have your say, but you can't have your way because you're not a part of the government. But there are things that you can do in the meantime that at least those things will help to keep the public involved, keep the public informed, of what's happening.
And that is the key. I don't think a lot of people are paying enough attention to what is going on. Going back to Dr. Markfield's comments, he's quite right. I read that statement and I didn't see very much in there for the people, and that's what bothers me the most. I see it. We were accused of wanting to spend all the money on education. I mean, can you believe someone would make that sort of statement in our legislature? That is where we should be spending it. The fact that we now have almost 40% of our working population earning less than $2,400 a month. The fact that 75% of Caymanians don't have any education beyond high school. The fact that interest rates just went up again yesterday. So the foreclosure situation is going to get worse. Mm-hmm. The fact that cost of living is forecast to increase. We are not in for the sweet spot that I keep hearing the government talk about. Caymanians are suffering, and in the past 4 years, before that, and up until now, the biggest concern that people come to me with were the two largest concerns: education, and of course jobs. And when we say unemployment has gone down for Caymanians, the people may be working, but they're not earning enough to sustain themselves and their families. And that's the effect of this cheap labor market we've developed here. And what I see when I see the government reject a motion that I brought, this sitting of the House, asking them to simply make sure you put things in place so that when this pension exodus happens, if it does, Caymanians will benefit. Caymanians will get first choice at those jobs. They voted against it.
Okay, folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor. My co-host, Dr. Steve Markfield, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn are with me, and we have as our guest this morning Mr. Alva Suku, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, as well as the member who represents the District of Newlands in our legislature. Please stay tuned. For the Record, we'll be back immediately after the news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with us this morning, Deputy Leader of the Opposition and the member who represents the constituency of Newlands in our Legislative Assembly, Mr. Alva Suku. We're going to get straight to business at this point in time, and I want to give Ms. Teresa Pitcairn an opportunity to pose some questions to Mr. Suku.
Right, thank you very much, Josie. So the level of consternation that I had when I listened to your opening speech about the relationship that exists within the Legislative Assembly. And, I pointed out that, you guys are being paid to do a job and not to mess about with the people's hard-worked money that they pay a lot for, and many members of our community do without. And in fact, as I was speaking to you, I got a series of texts about the whole role of redundancies. Mm-hmm. And, I'm asking myself, whether or not redundancies are currently approved by the Department of Labor. But to go back to that relationship, and I think it's toxic, mm-hmm. because so many of you have been there for such a long period of time, and the relationships that have developed over the years have become soured, so soured that you miss sight of the fact that you are actually employed to put the people of this community front and center of all decisions that you make, whether you don't like each other. And I mean, we are not paying you to get along necessarily and love each other. We're paying you to put your egos and testosterone outside and do the people's work. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually concerned now about us not having proper district councils. The legislation hasn't been revised because under our constitution, as you know, the district councils have a mandate to advise you guys. Mm-hmm. So if you guys took on board the concerns that members of the community have, the foolishness that you guys talk about and deal with in the House would probably be lessened. I'm not asking for perfect relationships. I'm not asking for you guys to be perfect people, but I'm asking you to perfectly reflect and represent the interest of our community. Mm-hmm. And, this foolishness really ought to stop. And so if we don't have the changes to the legislation that we need, can you guys not be proactive and have some type of interim council to show us that you care, to show us that you're going to do what you promised to do on the campaign trail. And I'm getting a little emotional this morning about it.
Yeah.
And, folks have, sometimes say, maybe I get too animated, but this is silly. Look how much money we pay you guys, and what do we have to show for it?
Exactly.
What do we have to show for it? And I must say, I am also going to ask the Caymanian people to be accountable. They must own this as well. This couldn't happen if Caymanians sit down and be quiet. I mean, you were saying, suggesting that maybe Caymanians are now subdued because they see that it's over and over and over and things don't change. Things will not change unless Caymanians get up and make their voices properly heard in a way that people cannot ignore it and do as they like.
And Teresa, I can't disagree with you on any of what you just said. As far as district councils go, that should have been one of the first things, because we all campaigned on it. That should have been one of the first things that every single member of that legislature did. What we have so far is Mr. Miller in Northside has reassembled his district council, which isn't legally recognized by the government. However, I applaud him for doing that. My plan is to have mine up and running by the end of September. Now, again, that won't be the official district council, but I can't wait on legislative changes. I really don't anticipate that this will get high priority on the government's list of changes, legislative changes that are coming. So I can't wait for that either. In walking around Newlands and campaigning, the number of people who expressed to me that they would like to work with me on a district council level was overwhelming. There's some very community-minded, strong community people in Newlands who want to see their constituency flourish and recognize the issues, and they want to work with the government. And I think that from an opposition point of view, that can only be a positive thing, because as I mentioned before, Al Saku, representative for Newlands, may get ignored by the government, but you're not going to ignore a cross-section of the residents of that community. And that gives more power to the people to be able to get what they want from the government. And it's sad when I see the attitudes towards this, because I don't hear anyone on the government side talking about this being a priority anymore. It's sort of died down. But I plan to have mine up and running by the end of September. There are a few things that I need to get Mr. Miller to assist me with in getting it organized. But he and I will work on that, and so will Mr. Eden. He's committed to doing that.
Well, we're not hearing, many people from the government side saying much of anything. We've heard the Minister for Education talk about, improved salaries for teachers, laudable, but how much more do you hear from from other ministers in relation to what's happening? You mentioned the strategic policy statement, and you said you don't really see a whole lot in there. That is really talking about addressing the human needs. And when you look at the Premier's statement and his address to the Legislative Assembly in regard to that, he says here, the strategic policy statement fulfills its statutory requirement to set out his administration's key fiscal priorities and our broad strategic outcome objectives for the Cayman Islands. It also puts forth the government's financial targets for the next 3 financial years, covering in more detail for the first time a 2-year period, 1st January 2018 to 31st of December 2019. You almost think that you're listening to a far right conservative Republican administration in the United States that's looking at the fiscal policies and then thinking about the trickle-down effect, the Reaganomics, the trickle-down effects to things. Then when we look at further down in his statement, he says, I want to note that the SPS was prepared on the basis of 4 fundamental principles that underpin this government's fiscal policy, with a number of objectives in mind, including 1, it must provide significant surpluses. 2, it must not include any new debt or taxes. 3, it must repay at least half of the bullet bond in 2019. 4, it must be affordable and fully comply with the framework for fiscal responsibility set out in the PMFL. It doesn't say anything here that it must improve the lives of our people, especially the most vulnerable in our society. If you were thinking about doing that, then people will laud you for it, and they will understand if there's a shortage on the fiscal side of things, or if you have to increase taxes because you're trying to help, help people.
In fact, see, when I read it and I circled that area, I said to myself, Al, I am sure, either didn't prepare this himself, or he hadn't appreciated what that actually said and what that actually conveyed. I intended to send our premier a comment on that personally because, I had to ask the question because I know that our premier cannot want us as the community to think that the priority of his new government is one that does not necessarily take as one of its utmost concerns the betterment of our people. Because I know our premier knows the state that we live in.
Well, Teresa, it's called achiemophobia. That's what it's called, achiemophobia. It's a fear of giving people access to success. That's what it is. And it seems to me that the work now of the government is to disempower the Caymanian people, to push them back from all the achievements that they have made over the last 3 decades, to push them back down, and to empower other people. That is what achiemophobia is, and this is and for me, when I hear the Minister of Education going out and promising that the minimum salary is going to be for $5,000 a month for teachers, and I don't see anything in the strategic policy statement that supports that. That really bothers me, because it seems to me that was not a consensus of the government.
Mm-hmm.
I was impressed with what she was trying to do.
Yes.
Yeah,
But
really
you look at
impressed,
what has been indicated in there for education. It's not even enough to finish John Gray. So how much is education going to benefit in the next 2 years?
But we have to do something, because 75% of our people, only graduate from high school. And the average one that graduates from high school can't get a job.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to a commercial break now. When we return, the conversation will continue. So please stay tuned. Press the pause button if you may, but don't change the dial. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Dr. Steve Macfield, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn, and our guest this morning, Mr. Alva Suku, Deputy Leader of the Opposition and Representative for the constituency of Newlands. We have one call, but before we go to that call, I just want to point out that this strategic policy statement and the speech, the presentation that was made by the Honourable Premier, in relation to that, does mention things in there. It's not just exclusively about fiscal policy. He does talk about social issues and stuff. In one portion there, he talked about affordable housing. He also speaks about Ronald Reagan, who once commented that the best social work programs is a good job, and he agrees. And he says the biggest single contribution to ensuring a decent standard of living is employment. So our second strategic objective is to improve the functioning of the labor market to ensure all Caymanians can find employment, can find employment. Our commitment to full employment does not mean everyone is employed all the time. There are short-term economic fluctuations in construction and tourism, for example, which means many people will face short periods of unemployment. However, there is no reason for short-term fluctuations to become a long-term problems. And it goes on to talk about Caymanians wishing to work. But I shouldn't be here explaining the government's strategic policy statement. The government should be here explaining that. We have had an election. We had an election on the 24th of May. Yes, the strategic policy statement was only delivered on, what date was that again, Mr. About 2 weeks ago? About 2 weeks ago was delivered, but the government needs to come on
Got to step up.
for the record and talk about it now. Don't leave me to talk about it, because I'm likely to leave out certain aspects of it unless I sit down here and read the whole thing. But as we try to be fair and balanced on here, I don't want to skewer the conversation in one direction or the other. I want to ensure that it is balanced.
But the important thing to note too is if you look at watch the proceedings in the LA, how many of the government members got up and spoke on this? Not many.
Yes.
The Premier and the Minister of Finance.
Yes.
By the way, speaking of, what's that 4.5 million that you all not talking about? That's my money.
I have
Come on.
no idea, and I agree with you. The decision has been made that when we do these settlements, these settlements of lawsuits and so on, that we don't make the information public. This one hasn't been settled yet, apparently, so they couldn't release any information. Not even to the opposition members. I would have thought we would have went in camera and discussed it, but no information to the opposition at all. This is a lawsuit settlement or part of the legal costs, and sorry, you guys have to vote for this or shut up.
I don't believe you.
Let's go to the caller.
Sorry. I don't believe you.
Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Connor. Good morning, Mr. Maxfield, Dr. Maxfield. My apologies.
Good morning,
Teresa, and good
morning.
Good morning, Alva.
Good morning.
I just got a few comments to make, and obviously it's about our strategic policy statement. And I think it's unfortunate that we have to have a conversation highlighting some of the things that we are concerned about, as opposed to getting behind it and helping it get through if it was something that was meaningful. And that's just my personal opinion. When we look at it, or at least when I look at it, it just looks like a magnified or an amped up version of what the already existing status quo is. And it's not really going to help any Caymanians to get to a point of self-sustainability or any self-wealth where they don't have to depend on the state. That's number one. And number two, what is even more unfortunate and disturbing to me is that the Premier spoke about construction jobs and labor jobs and all these other things, these short-term jobs, as opposed to having some strategic policy plan in place that is going to place Caymanians in jobs that, one, can help them and ensure that they can afford their monthly bills and be in a sustainable environment, which we didn't see any of that, talk about any of that. And Alva, you mentioned earlier about, the idea of making a remark that indicated that we're spending too much money on education, which I think is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard in my entire life. We need to put all the emphasis on education in order to get positive contributors. And then in the meantime, while doing that, we have to make sure that the legislative, policies are in place that ensure that Caymanians are not marginalized in the workforce. And one of the things that I read in there, where he wanted to change the point system on the PR and all these things he spoke about, and all these various things, but not one of them focused on the well-being of Caymanians and the sustainability of Caymanians. And what I would urge the government to do is to get into the communities by way of the district councils, understand the environment. And Teresa, I understand that we all believe that the Premier must know the environment that people are in right now. And it's not a conducive environment. It's not a sustainable environment. In fact, in most cases, it's not even a livable environment, because if you got to live in the garage of your brother's house, who he too is struggling to make mortgage payments, that's when we know we have a problem. So we can't scoot around the issues any longer and come out with this glamorous statement that you feel is covering all of the bases. If we don't have a proper educational system in place, we're not going to get productive members of society. If we take a look at the Truth Youth School It didn't, and the Premier made a lot of indentations in there about having proper facility to educate kids properly. Truthview School was never a big school. It's still not a big school to this day. And if you go by the numbers, it produced some of the most productive members of this society today. So we know that the school don't teach children. It's the curriculum, it's the teachers, it's the focus on the students themselves, and that's where we need to get back to. But when we have a Premier who have obviously been who have been institutionalized into the propaganda that they all preach to themselves, that these are the things that suffice. How in the world are we going to put a plan in place that is going to ensure in-transit jobs for Caymanians and expect that to be sustainable when we're going to create a policy that allow more people to become Caymanians, to marginalize those already Caymanians who have gone abroad, come back with their equipment in terms of education and can't get into the workforce? We got to start worrying about everybody else who's trying to be Caymanian and worry about those who already are Caymanian. He didn't speak about the hospitality industry, which is a lucrative industry. He mentioned tourism, and that was it. We need to secure real estate jobs for Caymanians. We need the real estate supervision jobs in the hospitality industry, where we see a lot of imported labor come here and be extremely successful in those industries. But yet we have no comprehensive training, no comprehensive oversight on how these things work and how important they are in the school. These are some of the things. I'm going to end it right there, Mr. Connor. I'm just saying that these are some of the things that I would have liked to have seen that they would have highlighted and at least emphasized, so Caymanians can have an idea and have something to hold on to. Have a good morning.
Thank you very much, caller. Thank you very much for that. We have two more callers. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. O.C.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning to Ms. Teresa, Dr. Steve McField,
Good morning,
and
ma'am.
to MLA Augusta Koo. This is Georgette E. Banks.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a statement to make and a question to ask. And when I make the statement and ask the question, I'll hang up because I've been listening very keenly to all what you've been saying this morning, especially Ms. Teresa. Both the things she said, I totally agree with. I'll throw this out to all of you, but especially to Dr. Steve McField, since he knows a lot of Cayman, or maybe more history than the rest of you, and also he's a lawyer. Now this is the question, and then I'll make the statement. Is it legal to sell off land in Cayman, especially the last, I think, 3 little beaches that we have? Is that legal? Not having brought it to the attention of the public. After all, this is our island, and they are supposed to be working for us. And that's the question. The question. And the statement is this: I wonder if our premier and the present government would like to be known when their terms are over and it goes down in history. Would they like to be known as would he like to be known as the premier and all those in the LA with him? I'd like to be known as those who sold our land without, I would say, our permission, and our last 3 little beaches I've heard mentioned. I don't think that would be a very great legacy to leave behind. And I'd like your input on it. And Mr. O.C., thank you very much for giving me all this time to run up my mouth. And I trust that all of you personally there you're well, and your family members too.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
God bless you all.
Thank you.
Okay, we lost the last caller, so if you want to comment now on the 2 callers. Well, we need a break first, so we'll do the comments after we take the break, folks. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Dr. Steve Macfield, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn, and our special guest this morning, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition and member representing the constituency of Newlands, Mr. Alva Suku. I'm told that we have one caller, so again, we will go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Miss Teresa, and good morning, gentlemen. Dr. Macfield, how are you, sir?
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm fine. How are
Yes,
you?
Mr. OC and Mr. Alva.
Morning.
I got a quick question I would like to ask, and if you could explain it to me. What is the requirements when somebody has been terminated off of their job, and do they have a right to ask for a letter of the termination, why they was released from their job, and is it any law that allow a person, if they didn't steal or they didn't been disrespectful or anything, but because it seemed like because of somebody else coming in with a work permit, they released the Caymanian. Is there any law against that for that person to be compensated?
So you're saying this someone was terminated from a position without being given a termination letter?
Or notice.
That's
But
one.
that's a violation of the law right
Yeah,
there.
and they should have been given notice and stuff like that, and an opportunity to.
Yeah. And if there are no reasons given, that's unfair dismissal.
Yeah.
Clear case.
Or was the person given a written warning or something like that in advance of that?
And how long were
you
they
know,
working? Was it just for
need more
6 months or a
details,
probationary period?
Certainly need more details than
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find out because they're telling the person that they're not qualified, but the person was a cashier for 10 years in other, actually bigger entities, and had no problem whatsoever. Whatsoever, the person said, and they just started working 3 months with this new company, and they told them that the season is slow now, but we understand that they applied for a work permit, and that was in the newspaper for the same job.
Mm-hmm. Carl, I think you need to get more specific details really for us to make a determination. We wouldn't really want to speculate without all of the facts.
Information.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Any more callers, Ms. Susan? No callers. I want to give Ms. Zuku and our panel an opportunity we have Ms. Georgette's question that was posed as well.
Well, Ms. Georgette might be surprised to know that Caymanians don't own any land, really. And the government doesn't own any land because the land belongs to Her Majesty. Ms. Georgette, if you have a constitution, please turn to page 25 and in section 38. And this is what it says. Subject to any law for the time being enforced in the Cayman Islands, the governor or any person duly authorized by him or her in writing under his or her hand may in Her Majesty's name and on Her Majesty's behalf make and execute under the public seal grants and dispositions of any land or other immovable property within the Cayman Islands that may be lawfully granted or disposed by Her Majesty.
That's any land.
Any land. Any land. So that means that the land that the government takes in, either through people going into the old folks' home, and the government took care of them, and the land that was vested in the government, or any land belong to the Queen, belong to Her Majesty the Queen, and the Queen. The Constitution says that Her Majesty can, through the governor, can authorize any person to sell the land. So if the governor authorizes the Legislative Assembly to sell the land, the ministers to sell the land, they can sell the land in certain lands. They have to come down to the Legislative Assembly and get a resolution by the Legislative Assembly to go and do it. But the land can be sold by the governor or anyone authorized by him or her. And that's the position in the Cayman Islands. So the Caymanian people don't really own those properties. Those properties are vested in Her Majesty the Queen.
Okay, thank you very much for Dr. Steve McField for that. I am, Mrs. Zuko, unless you want to say something, I'm going over this list here with the some of the properties, because you mentioned, that there are various properties. There are some that have been sold already, different recommendations. For instance, we have Block 15B, parcel 376 in South Sound. It's a quarter of an acre. It's a former road that has been sold to Home Gas. We have 13EH, parcel 129, Georgetown Central. That's on North Church Street, opposite the Lobster Pot. That's the Joyce Hilton Family Life Center. And it says that sale is currently out to public tender. We have 15B, parcel 35H10, South Sound. It's only 1,252 square feet. It's a Foster Village condo. Mm-hmm. It's a condo.
Yes.
And that one, it says that the Department of Environment now wishes to retain that. I would imagine we could take some family and put in that, as well, rather than paying all of that rent. But then maybe the Foster people in Foster Village may not, if you have to get approval from the board or something like that, they may not want who government wants to put in there to be there. We have 20D 175 Georgetown East. That consists of 3.23 acres. And that has been sold subject to a contract to CADS Holdings Limited. I'm not sure, what that is. And then we have another piece, Block 95B, parcel 170. And the registration section is Cayman Brack West. Was that the one? Yes, and the recommendation for that it is that located marketing or to vest in the airports, to be vested in the Airports Authority. So there are various options that government has, for some of these properties. I've seen one here on Old Robin Road, and it's a beach property, and I am almost certain that is a piece of property that the Scouts, the Boy Scouts, as well as the Girls Guides have used. That property have been given permission by government to use that property for camping on. And I'm going to check that out, because those are the types of properties that we really need to retain. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Morning, gentlemen. Morning, Mr. Teresa.
Good morning. Good
morning.
Morning.
Mr. Saku, nice to hear you on the radio.
Thank you.
Quick question. Going back to Steve McField and the jobs and stuff. People are making other people redundant and then bringing in other people for that same position that they just made redundant for, and they reopen that position. When a job is made redundant, I'm asking a question. Doesn't that mean that they don't need that position anymore? Why? I mean, even though that they paid the person off that did the job for 3 years, 2 years, but then they bring someone else in that's not qualified and have them on a temp and have the person that's qualified train them and then let the Caymanian go. I think there's no laws that that can help the Caymanians in this position. And I mean, once they get paid off, they don't. Some people doesn't want to get paid off. They just want the job to pay their bills. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking this is unfair, and there's no assistance in this for the Caymanians. I'm making your job redundant. You're no longer working here after today. I'm paying you $10,000. This is it. Next 2 weeks, they have someone else into the position, and they reopen that position. I don't think that they should be able to reopen that position, or they rename that position, and they are doing the same thing in that position. Mm-hmm. I will hang up and let Ms. Teresa and Mr. McField answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller.
And just to take a quick stab at it before the lawyers chip in, I think redundancies have become a convenient way of getting rid of Caymanians now. I have a number of people who have come to me with the same concern that someone has been made redundant, and then weeks later or the following day, someone else is here on a work permit doing that job. Now, what disappoints me is that we had a new employment law drafted, and when I departed from the PPM caucus, I had seen a presentation of that draft law, that bill.
Human resources law.
Human resources
Yeah.
law, and it still hasn't come. It's been 2 years since that plus some, and we still don't have the law on the books. So these situations where redundancies are occurring and so forth, no one is really giving them the attention that they need to be given. There's no requirement to go and have the redundancy approved by the Department of Labor, whoever. So employers are taking advantage of that opportunity now to be able to get rid of someone and have a valid reason for doing it according to the law. We need to. This is one area where I was disappointed I didn't see much mention of these labor issues in the SBS. This is something that again was severely lacking.
And my question for the lawyers would be, don't we have a precedent-setting case, the late Astley McLaughlin case against the government of the Cayman Islands when they attempted to make his position redundant, and after he left, I don't remember the full details of it, but the court found the government at fault for that. Isn't that precedent setting, and doesn't that really while it sets the standard for government, shouldn't it also set the standard for the private sector? Because it seems as if what is happening now is that these companies are finding more and more loopholes, and it's like your parents would say when you were a small child, once you get away with it once, then that's it. There's no way to rein you in after that.
It should be a precedent-setting situation, but our people lack the ability to defend themselves. I should put it that way. A lot of our people do not have the resources to defend themselves, and they do not have the access to the judicial system to defend themselves. In other jurisdictions, people would get together and bring class actions. When things like this happen, and employers would be loath to be able to make people redundant when actually they are firing them from their jobs and hiring new people. But you need to go to court. You need to tie these people up in court. You need to go to the courts and to vet your complaints in the courts, because the Caymanian people believe that the politicians are going to help them. They are in for a long wait.
But what we see, I'm going to come to your headline news, Ms. Susan, very quickly. What we see, though, is that we have a Bill of Rights that addresses issues relating to the government.
But who enforces the Bill of Rights?
My point is, it's directed towards the government. We have a complaints commissioner's office, again directed towards the government. Government is not the only culprit that we're finding here. Most of the grievances, a lot of the grievances that people have in relation to employment is with the private sector. And we have nothing other than whatever we have on the law books in relation to them, forcing people to have to use their own money. We need a public advocacy. We need a public advocate to be able to have an office, something that you and Ms. Teresa were hoping to set up at one point in time, where these people could come and seek legal representation because they couldn't afford to do it on their own. You can see what can happen sometimes. You take an employer to court and you're unsuccessful, then you end up having to pay the cost, and those people don't necessarily have the financial resources towards that. So we have to start making laws making the private sector as accountable, or even more accountable sometimes, than government. Headline news, and then we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Deputy Leader of the Opposition and member representing the constituency of Newlands, Mr. Alva Suku, Dr. Steve Macfield, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn. We have 3 callers, but before we go to the phone lines, we have an email from one person as well. It says, again, thank you all for taking your time to bring awareness to political issues that affect all residents of the Cayman Islands. In particular, this morning I heard Mr. Suku mention setting up his council in his area. Please, can you define and explain the establishment of the councils as I understand it, these are to be district councils, not constituent councils. So how will this work? Will there be a district and then a sub-constituent council? And I think that this question deserves to be answered, and I want to give you an opportunity to answer that before we go to the phone lines.
Mm-hmm. Well, my view on it is that each constituency would have a council, rather than having just one council, for example, Bordentown. Because we've moved to single-member constituencies,
Right.
the way I read the definition,
Hence one of the needs to amend the legislation
Exactly.
Right.
to
That's what I was
accommodate
thinking.
that, yes.
And on an interim basis, you on that premise, you said, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I think it then becomes more practical because, you know, we've split up the districts into constituencies now. So it makes sense to have a council, and it doesn't have to be, you know, 20, 30 people.
Right.
At the executive level of it. However, you know, a good working district council could have 4 or 5, well, I would say an odd number, but 5 people working with the representative for that constituency and be very effective.
Okay.
Well, the district council law is already there, and it sets out the number of people on each council. It sets out the chairperson, the secretary, the deputy chair, and the treasurer of the district council, and it sets out the district councillors. And it's supposed to be for every electoral district. That means we would have 19 district councils, and it's not a political council. It has nothing to do with the council for the politician. It's a district council, people from the district that are constitutionally bound, to advise the elected members of the district
on matters relating to the
district.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the phone lines. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning to the panel, everybody there. I just want to say you guys doing a great job bringing up some of the main issues that we face on this little Cayman Islands that we call Rock. One thing, I keep hearing a lot of times that government shouldn't be run like a business. And I think, you know, from the time you're collecting money and spending money, you should have checks and balances, and that means that's a business. And, you know, one of the things in regards to selling out the land, I'm saying to myself, you have all these assets. What makes you king and rule your country is financially stable. If you have all these assets, if you sell them, you get one money for it one time, and you're gonna spend it. I always say we're making all these roundabouts around Cayman. Who owns that land? The government owns the land. We should take that roundabout, put up one of those billboard signs, and you got 3 junctions coming each way on most of these roundabouts. Face that with an advertisement plan and say, you know what, A company, you could pay $50,000 a year for this side. Next side, you could pay another $50,000. I think, you know, if we're smart as a government and as a people, we would take our resources and be more business minded and make money out of our assets. But I keep hearing that that we shouldn't run the government like a business. And to me, either you run it like a business or you run it like a mafia. Because if you're not running it like a business and you're doing your checks and balances, whenever you need money, you like the mafia, you know, say, okay, well, people, you got to pay up, you know. And I think, you know, a lot of these guys that are in the politicians' position, they are business people. They've been in business. They either still own their business, and I think they need to apply some of that in their country.
Okay,
you know?
thank you very much, caller, for that. Now, we always hear the terminology, you know, you don't run government, or government should be run like a business. Well, government really shouldn't be looking at the profitability margin. That's not what it should be looking at. But at the same time, running government like a business in terms of its efficiency and delivering on what you have to deliver. That is how, what people should mean when they say, running it like a business. We have 3 more callers. Callers, I'm going to ask you to be as brief as possible because we want to accommodate everyone. And I don't want to have to interrupt what you have to say, but at the same time, I'm going to ask you to please be as brief as possible because, time is important for us now. We don't have a whole lot of it left on the show this morning. So first caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. O.C.
Good morning, sir.
Morning to you and your co-host and also MLA, Mr. Alva Suku.
Morning.
Good morning.
I just want to talk about the person that called a while ago in relation to people being terminated, made redundant, and then positions reopened and maybe expats brought in to fill the vacancy.
Right.
Now that is an issue called constructive dismissal, or it can be called constructive dismissal. It's not something that is covered by the labor law, as the learned lawyers on your panel would know. I think it's covered on the common law, and we'd have to go to court to get remedy for it, to courts. Of course, that can be expensive, it can be time-consuming, and also with all the legal gymnastics, it could take forever too. So I just want to ask Mr. Suku, the Labour Relations Bill that was put forward by the previous government was a very comprehensive bill which amended or revised and rewrote the labour law. That bill seemed to have died in the last legislature and the last government. And I'll just ask him, Mr. Suku, he wasn't able to influence that bill going forward and becoming law when he was part of the previous government. Is he contemplating pushing the Labour Relations Bill now that he's on the opposition and hoping to hopefully get something passed that will remedy some of these problems? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day and God bless you.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Want to answer that before we go to the next caller? Yes, sure.
I'd mentioned that earlier, that I was disappointed that the bill hasn't come forward. As far as pushing the issue onto the agenda, it's difficult to push the bill because the government has to bring that bill. However, private members' motions and so forth can be brought to ask the government to do it. So, I intend to properly advocate for getting this done. That's the issue he mentioned just now, redundancies and us being exploited, so to speak, and not having any legal protection. That was one of the things that would have been addressed.
Addressed in there. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Next caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, the Three Musketeers.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
We have a fourth one this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Alva Suku. No, he has not attained that yet. He's an elected representative. So he cannot say the things that you all say. Neither can I. I'm glad, Dr. Steve, that you keep, and Teresa, also Mr. O.C., reminding our people that we are a British Crown colony. We all, I'm sure, know the national anthem. It is all about one person and one person only, not about the people of that the monarchy controls or the monarch controls, not about the government there, not about the flag or the country. It says, God bless the reigning monarch. Our passport also says, this passport belongs to the Crown. It doesn't say anymore the British government or Majesty's British government, as the other one said. And it says, on behalf of Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State, the governor, doesn't mention Cayman, it says the governor of this British territory. So there we have it, there we must understand. Many times we speak as if we are an independent country. And I'll leave you with a question. But before that, I would say that even as an half-idiot like myself, I do not think we can have district councils for how it was with one whole broad terminology, because the elections were about and restricted by the people of each of the 19 districts to that particular district. So therefore, they must have their own council.
We agree with that. We agree with that.
And have we checked, I keep bringing this up, since we're a crown colony, Bermuda is also one. Are they having the same problems that you're all discussing, which are very important, the labor problem and so forth? Because I know that they have labor unions there. And that's a very important thing that we don't have. And we know the reason why we can't have them. We know the reason why, the powerful forces that prevent them. But as I will leave you all with this word, that word, courage. Mr. Saku, courage. I like your style and what you're doing, and I'm God blessing on all our MLAs, because I don't think anyone went in there to try to destroy the country.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a word you must keep in mind. Courage. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Listen on.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. And just to point out, what the caller says is actually right. We are satisfied. We are pleased to make ourselves subservient to other forces and other people. And as long as we agree and we feel comfortable with that, we are not all whole men and women. We are not. We are not complete when we decide to make ourselves subservient to others. Let's take a commercial break. When we come back, Dr. Steve will give you an opportunity to comment on that as well. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We have two callers. Those are going to be our final two calls for the morning. So let's accommodate them, and then we can then give our panel an opportunity to address all or some of the questions that have been posed by those previous callers, as well as the two callers that we have on the line now. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Good morning, caller. Welcome to For the Record. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I'm going to make this quick. I know you don't know how much time, but there's something that I think that would be a great idea if we can get the legislatures to do it, or the government or whoever it is. Maybe we need to have a thing on the next election that we could say if we want to have something like this. But a recall thing that when people doing their job, we can get rid of them, because there are people in there right then, but in there for I don't know how long they've been there, but you don't hear these people speak, and yet they're collecting a big salary. You don't hear them that they've done anything while they're there. We need a recall thing on these people, that when they make mistakes or don't make mistakes or whatever they do, we need to have something that the people in the middle of our government can say, the guy ain't doing his job, let's get rid of him. You see? But we don't have that. And that's one of the things I think we should have in this island. And that would give them the incentive then, that when they're in there, they're going to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. That's my 2 cents this morning, gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, caller. I think our caller that we lost may have rejoined us. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yes, good morning, OC. Sorry about that. Some technical difficulties.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning to your panel, and good morning to my colleagues there, Alvis Saku.
Hey, morning, Kenneth. How you doing?
Not too bad. I just wanted to add a little bit of contribution to the district council's matter. And one of the major concerns that I have is my fear that the district council's law will not be addressed for at least another 2 years. And the reason why I say that, I know that Dr. Steve Maxfield knows about the law itself, and it reads about how the district council becomes effective. It goes to government, to the premier, and asks for funding for things that they want to address in the district. Now, if they're going to ask, even if we as members select this council, which we're going to do anyway, we're not going to be able to get anything, because the simple fact is the government is going to say, well, we haven't allocated any money in the budget for that. And because they don't plan to change it until after the budget allocations, we will never be able to have any money allocated in the budget to address these things. So I know that we're not going to get any effectiveness based on the premier's lack of wanting to address it before the budget. None of our councils will ever be effective unless we we're just doing things by a physical standpoint in our community or going out to the private sector and begging money to do it, because the Premier is refusing to address the problem before a very important point of the budget. And this is why it should have been addressed before this, because this next budget is for 2 years. We're going to be into this administration over 2 years and 6 months before effectively our district council can work and operate properly under the current law. So it's a concern for me. Obviously, myself and Alva has already indicated that we're going to do it anyway, but we're going to have a difficult time finding monies to address the needs of the district councils once they come together and find out the constituency matters. Anyway, that's my contribution. Thank you for allowing me to
Thank you very much, caller. Just want we have one more caller that we're going to take. I just want to say that I believe, and you would know this, Mr. Suko, more than I would, because, being on the ground in your constituency. But I believe that there are people who are prepared to serve. Forget about the money at this stage. Mr. Miller has his, and he doesn't have a money problem.
Exactly.
There are people who, because of what they have invested in their communities, are prepared to serve without that. And one listener has basically said, if the opposition wants to stop land sales, call public meeting, courthouse steps, make government listen to them. The same thing with the advisory district councils. Put them in operation. Ensure that they're functional, because what you want is feedback from them. So if they give you the feedback and they hear you articulate that in the Legislative Assembly, either in debates or by way of private members' motion, that gets the ball rolling. That gets it working. We're going to take the one.
To touch on what you were saying, I met with a group of ladies yesterday who have a community group in Newlands who, not sanctioned by government or anything, but they do their own fundraising, and the district councils are allowed to raise funds. So, you'll have to take the harder route, but you still can do it.
Exactly.
You won't get I don't think you get anywhere near the amount of resources that government could give you, but you will be able to raise your own.
Precisely. Let's take the last caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good morning, good gentlemen, all of you. I won't take the time. I know you're on short time. I tend to be long-winded. I'm trying to be short, though. I'm talking here about accountability of government. Mr. Saku, this is addressed to you specifically, sir. Government, when they pass certain laws, we're required as citizens to comply with those laws within a certain period of time. There is some legislation, for instance, on the FOI, in which requires government to give a response within 30 days, and then they have an additional 30 days extension that they can take. However, none of those, if they go beyond the 30 days, and they have, and beyond the next 30 days, a total of 60 days, they've gone beyond that time, there is no consequence upon those persons that are responsible to comply with the law and to give the answer within the 30 days or the 60 days. I will bring one example of non-compliance of government. And it relates to today's editorial where they're talking about the ever-increasing subsistence payments to people. We introduced a pension law in 1998 that was to begin to reduce that, where people would save for their own retirement expenses and their own retirement income replacement in retirement. But there has been maladministration in the private sector, terrible maladministration. There has been malregulation in government and not compliance with the laws. And one of the areas that's a lot of non-compliance is that the law requires an annual report to be prepared by the board and submitted to the government, to the minister. And then at the next meeting of the Legislative Assembly, the minister, by law, is obligated to lay that on the table. The last report to be prepared was for the year 2007 and 8. While I was on the board, reports have been submitted to the ministry, but the ministry refused to forward them to the minister and for them to be put on the table. Now, it is a board report. The ministry And the minister is not supposed to change that report. But the reason why they haven't been submitted was because they wanted the reports changed to not expose some of the bad things that have gone on. And the orders of some of the pension plans and all that. I don't have to go into the details and give you examples. But that has happened. It's now 10 years since the last report on the pensions from the pension board was submitted to the Legislative Assembly. And it could be another 10 years. There is no consequence on people. I am asking you, sir, would you undertake, and I would love to sit on a committee if you would form it, that would look at laws and see which laws require government to do certain things. And if they don't do it, then there is compensation to those that suffer as a result of non-compliance, and some punitive measure against those who have the ultimate responsibility to do the work if they don't do the work.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Thank you very much. Appreciate that as well. Very quickly, before we get into final comments, one listener has pointed out that Section 77 of the Constitution allows any member of the Legislative Assembly to bring a bill. And I'll very quickly read Section 77, subsection 1. Subject to this Constitution and standing orders. So it's subject to the Constitution as well as the standing orders. Any member may introduce any bill or propose any motion for debate in, or may present any petition to the Legislative Assembly, and the same shall be debated and disposed of in accordance with the standing orders. Of course, the phrase there, standing orders, that's the operative phrase there.
Right.
And to your knowledge, does the standing order in any way permit you from bringing a motion, let's say to amend the labor law, other than through a private member's motion?
The standing orders allow me to bring a private member's bill. Now, that would be the equivalent of the government bringing a bill to create a law, change a law.
Yes.
Now, you can imagine the amount of work that goes into that process. So, you'll have a bill that comes before the LA, and an entire ministry has been working on that bill. For me, as a single member of the opposition, to do something and bring a draft bill or law, it is possible, but
Herculean.
And I would need the resources behind it.
But
so for me,
that's why you would need your district council.
Or you would need the
someone
legal
in the private
resources
sector, to help you.
Because you are financially responsible for whatever it is you produce. You don't get any assistance from government for doing those sorts of things. So that's why you rarely see private members' bills. But it is entirely possible to do it, yes.
Okay. Mr. Suka, we've reached the hour of interruption. So I want to give you an opportunity for some closing comments as well as my panel.
Yeah, well, just to thank you for having me on the show. It was pretty fast-paced, so I don't think we got to cover everything.
Yes.
And, I really do enjoy listening to your colleagues here. Because I know Teresa for a long time. She has a lot to offer this country, and she has consistently done that. So thank you for advocating, and of course, Dr. Macfield. He is someone who I respect immensely, and to hear his contributions and see that he's continuing to do it. A lot of us have given up. A lot of us have reached the point where we feel it's futile. There's no point in doing it. But people that continue to steadfastly hold true to this country, I really do appreciate. I, for one, didn't do this a second time just to sit on the opposition bench and become part of the furniture. So you can expect more from me. You can expect a lot more in terms of trying to bring about change. And, I'm not going to become one of those people who accepts the status quo. The day that I start to do that, I'm going to leave politics. So my plan is to move forward and to give people something that they can believe in, whether that be a new political entity or continuing to work within the confines of the opposition bench as part of the official opposition. But change has to come now. I've seen it. I've heard the message. I've received that message from my constituents. Caymanians are suffering. Caymanians are not getting the benefit of all this development and progress that we talk about. And someone has to advocate for the Caymanians. Someone has to do that. I believe this government is making more of an effort to advocate for every other entity or individual that doesn't fit into that definition. I know they will hate me for saying that, but it's a reality of it. My constituents tell me that every day. The education, the focus on education is not there. The opportunities for Caymanians are not there. The protections for Caymanians are not there. We briefly talked about a host of those this morning. So I will move forward. I will continue to fight the fight. And, they have to deal with me for 4 more years, despite the fact that they think I barely got elected. And I hope sometime during this term that when I look across at those government benches, I see some eyes open up. Because what I see over there is silence. And there are people who campaign very hard for the opportunity to represent their constituents. But when I look across there, I see them falling asleep. And they're being led. And they need to, especially the new ones, open your eyes, have that come to Jesus moment that I did when I decided what I was doing wasn't benefiting my country.
Again, thank you very much for being here, Mr. Suku, and we look forward to having, at least one member. And I must say that the Leader of the Opposition has sent us a schedule, for the whole month of September in terms of who will be appearing on this show, as well as those who will be appearing on Mr. Sterling's show as well. Ms. Teresa, final comment?
So there was a comment that Mr. Mickey made as he was ending his conversation with us, and he said that the elected leaders didn't really go into office to destroy the country, and I truly believe that. This morning, I am going to personally beseech our Premier to get into the business of team building, because I know we have a Westminster system that is literally antagonistic, but Cayman is much too small to ignore the role and purpose of a bipartisanship relationship. You don't have to like folks that are there. And in fact, as I've said this morning, many of you have been there for far too long and have the history of what has transpired in that house has led to relationships which are not in the best interest of we the people who pay you a salary to do what is right for us. I believe you, Al, have the ability to leave the past in the past, because this is your last term. You have a unique and godly moment to set us on a path where we get past what transpired in the past. And yes, I know you have to try and deliver a balanced economy, but you have got to start putting Caymanians first. Caymanians must be first in their own community. And build a team that you can lead even when you disagree.
Doc?
I think that the Cayman young people are moving into a chronic national inability syndrome. And that is because presently it seems to me that the elected members, most of the elected members of the Assembly has a personality cult. A personality cult that is based on lack of knowledge and envy and jealousy. And that is detrimental to the success of the Caymanian people. And we have been waiting for elections after elections to see them achieve something that we can be proud to say that we're Caymanians. I'm not proud to be a Caymanian now. I used to be proud to be a Caymanian. I used to be a brag about it once before. I'm not now. And it seems to me that with the amount of money that we spend on each and every elected member, that we ought to have demand more consideration for us. And it seems to me that somebody was saying about whether or not there should be a recall. Well, there's no recall clause in colonial constitutions. They don't put them there. They have all kind of safeguards, like the ability to bring down the government for vote of no confidence and so forth. So, unless I see something positive in the next year or so, I will be moved from this seat that I'm sitting in and be very active in the streets. Because unless you go out to be active in the streets, like Martin Luther King and all of those people there doing the civil rights marches and stuff, things that you're not going to get anything done. Because if poor people believe that people who are making their salaries and are sitting in their seats and are comfortable with their salaries and pension care about them, they got a new thing. They got something to think about because they do not care about them. In fact, when I was a student in Canada and I lived with some people who were very wealthy people, the first thing they told me, don't tell people that you are poor because rich people and people who are successful do not like poor people. And that's the problem that we have in this country. We have to go out and do it ourselves. Because what I see here in this and SBC is SBS is a declaration of inabilities.
Okay. Folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension for the record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For those of you who are advocating and who believe in the concept of advisory district councils, I want to say to you, take heart. Remember the opposition to one person, one vote, single member constituencies. There was a pushback for that. At the same time, those naysayers, many of them came on board afterwards as well once they saw the public support for it and the groundswell of support that came for that. The same thing can happen with advisory district councils as well, because that is where you, the people, get to have your voice. You had your voice, you had your say on the 24th of May 2017, and you can continue to have your say by way of your advisory district councils. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. Say to you, have a great day, have a great weekend. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling Dwayne Ebanks at 12 noon for a talk today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
For the Record is
informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.